I had always prided myself on being independent. From the moment I left for college, I told myself I wasn't going to be the kind of person who relied on others, especially not family. I loved my parents, of course, but I'd seen too much growing up that made me determined to carve out my own path, even if it meant doing things on my own. I had bought my house 2 years ago, and it felt like a major victory. Not because it was a mansion or anything, it was a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, but it was mine. Every inch of it represented hard work and sacrifice. I had worked 2 jobs for months to save up for the down payment, and I was proud of the life I had built there. I'd always felt a strange mixture of pride and guilt about my independence. My father, in particular, never seemed to understand why I didn't need to ask him for help the way other people did. He was a proud man, but there was always a hint of expectation beneath his pride, as if he thought that I owed him something for giving me life. I didn't hold it against him. He'd done what he could for me, even if it wasn't always the right way. But I'd learned early on to take care of myself, and that meant keeping my distance from his financial problems. I think that's what hurt the most about our relationship, the fact that I could never seem to do enough. When I first bought the house, he was proud, but that pride quickly turned to jealousy, then to resentment. He didn't outright say it, but the way he spoke to me made it clear that he didn't think I should have been able to do it without his help. The constant comments about how much money he had to spend raising me, or how I'd just gotten lucky, started to sting after a while. I knew he was struggling with his own debts, but I'd made it clear that I wasn't in a position to bail him out. I wasn't going to risk my financial security for the sake of guilt. "Don't forget where you came from," he'd say, in a way that was supposed to be a warning. "You won't always be able to stand on your own, you know." I'd roll my eyes, but I never confronted him directly about it. The truth was, his constant hints made me uneasy. I had been on my own for years, and the last thing I wanted was for my father to think he could control my decisions. But at the same time, I couldn't help but wonder if I was pushing him too far away. We'd had a rocky relationship for as long as I could remember, and even though I didn't show it, I still wanted him to be proud of me. Over the years, I'd stayed in touch with him, mostly through phone calls or occasional visits. The visits were always awkward. He'd ask about my career, about the house, about my social life, but it always felt like a performance. He was watching me with the same critical eyes, as if waiting for me to slip up or fall short. I couldn't quite place it, but there was always a sense of competition in the air. It was subtle, but it was there. I'd been working overseas for the past 6 months on an exciting new project that required me to travel to several countries. It was a huge step in my career, and I had embraced the opportunity. I loved the thrill of being somewhere new, of testing my limits and growing in ways I couldn't have imagined. My house was left behind, but it wasn't just a building to me, it was the symbol of everything I had accomplished. I trusted that it would be waiting for me when I returned. Things hadn't been perfect between my father and me while I was away, but they were stable. At least that's what I thought. I'd told him I was going on this assignment, and as usual, he'd made a comment about how he was glad to see I was doing well. I tried to be more open with him over the years, even if that meant enduring his digs and passive-aggressive remarks. But I wasn't prepared for what would come next. I had sent him a brief message about a week before I was set to return home, just checking in. It was simple enough. "Hey Dad, coming back next week. Can we catch up? Hope everything's good with you." I didn't think much of it. After all, he'd been busy with his own projects, and I assumed he was just doing his usual thing, complaining about his financial issues, offering unsolicited advice, and telling me how to handle life. But then came the email. It was short, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. The subject line read, "Your property." I opened it, thinking it was just another random update from the bank or some mail I needed to deal with, but what I saw made my stomach drop. The email was from a realtor I didn't even know. They introduced themselves, explaining that my father had listed my house for sale. According to them, I'd abandoned the property, and my father had signed all the necessary documents to put it up for sale. I read the email over and over again, trying to process the words in front of me. It didn't make sense. This couldn't be happening. My father knew how much I cared about that house. I had spent hours painting the walls, planting flowers in the front yard, and fixing up the kitchen. There was no way he could have done this. But the email didn't lie. I immediately tried to call him, over and over again. My phone rang with no answer. I left messages, but still nothing. My heart raced as I frantically tried to get in touch with anyone who might know what was going on. It wasn't just about the house, it was about the betrayal, the lies, the complete disregard for my life, and the work I had put into everything. I felt my blood boil with anger, but underneath that anger there was a deep sense of hurt. How could he do this to me, and why didn't he think I had a right to know? It was clear to me that I had to go home. I couldn't let this happen. I wasn't about to let my father sell my house, and worse, without so much as a conversation. I couldn't sit idly by and let him tear apart everything I had worked so hard to build. It was time to face him. I landed back in the city late in the evening, the lights below blurring as my mind raced with every possible scenario. I didn't know what I expected, but certainly not this. The email had shaken me to the core, and I felt the weight of it with every step I took through the airport. I tried to breathe, tried to tell myself I was overreacting, but I knew deep down that this was no misunderstanding. My father had crossed a line. By the time I got into a cab, I was already composing the words for the confrontation in my head. "How could you do this?" I imagined saying. "I trusted you." But the truth was, I didn't even know how to begin. The betrayal felt too big, too personal, and I was terrified of what I might discover when I finally saw him face to face. The cab ride felt endless. I stared out the window, the city passing by in flashes, but nothing felt real. My mind kept going back to the email. Abandon the house? I wasn't just away for a few days on vacation. I had been on a work assignment, and even if I had been gone for months, that house wasn't just a property. It was mine. My pride, my independence, everything I had worked for, and now my father was going to sell it? Without my consent? I got to the house just after midnight. The street was quiet, the kind of silence that made everything feel like it was frozen in time. I stood in front of the house for a moment, staring up at the place I thought of as my sanctuary. It looked exactly as I had left it. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but I knew that wasn't the point. The damage had already been done, and I wasn't sure what I would find when I walked through the door. I let myself in, and there he was. My father, sitting on the couch, the TV playing softly in the background. He looked up when I entered, but his face didn't register any shock. No surprise at all. As if he'd been expecting me. As if he knew exactly what I was about to walk in and confront him about. "Hey, kid," he said casually, almost like nothing had happened. "Good to see you," my chest tightened. "Good to see me," I repeated, the words catching in my throat. "You think this is good?" He raised an eyebrow, an air of confusion sweeping over him. "What's the matter? You're home, aren't you?" I stood there for a moment, my mouth opening and closing as I struggled to find the right words. But there was only one thing that came out. "You sold my house." His eyes widened slightly, but he quickly recovered, flashing a thin smile. "It's not like that. I didn't sell it yet. Just listed it for now. You weren't living here, so what was the harm in that?" "What was the harm?" I repeated, feeling the anger rise in me. "You went behind my back and listed my house for sale, Dad. How could you think that was okay?" He shifted uncomfortably on the couch, avoiding my gaze. "You weren't here. You didn't care about it. I figured I'd help us both out. Things have been tight, you know. I've been trying to figure out how to pay off some debts, and this seemed like the easiest way." "You thought selling my house was the solution?" I couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. "You think I would just abandon it? You think I didn't care? Well, you've been gone for months. It wasn't like you were doing anything with it. I figured, why not let it help both of us? It wasn't like you were going to sell it. You're out there living your life while I've been stuck here trying to keep things together." His words felt like a slap in the face. I had worked for everything I had, and I couldn't believe he was justifying his actions this way. "That house is mine. It's not some piece of property you get to sell to pay off your debts," I said, my voice shaking with fury. You had no right to do this. I did what I had to do, he snapped back. I've been struggling. You wouldn't understand, would you? You've got your nice little life out there and I'm here stuck trying to make ends meet. I thought you'd be okay with this. No, I'm not okay with this, I shouted, the frustration finally boiling over. I never asked you to do this for me, Dad, and I certainly didn't ask you to sell my home. He stood up then, his face reddening. It's not just your home. You think you can just disappear for months at a time and come back acting like everything's fine? You've abandoned this place just like you've abandoned me. I froze. The words hit harder than anything else he'd said. Abandoned me? I had abandoned him? I hadn't asked for any of this. I had been there for him when I could, but I couldn't live my life for him. You don't get to say that to me, I managed, the words feeling like they had to be dragged out of me. You don't get to use me as an excuse for your mistakes. There was a long silence between us. A tension thick enough to cut through. I could feel the years of resentment, of unspoken words hanging in the air. Finally I spoke again, but this time my voice was cold. I'm stopping the sale. I don't care what you think you need. You don't get to make decisions for me, not like this. He laughed bitterly. You think you can just walk in here and fix this? It's already done, kid. I don't know how you're going to stop it now. I'll figure it out, I said, my voice hard, but I'll make sure you don't get away with this. I turned to leave, but not before giving him one last look. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, and no matter how hard I tried to calm myself, the frustration kept building. I had tried to talk to my father, to reason with him, but all he had done was justify his actions and make me feel guilty for wanting to protect what was mine. It was infuriating, but I knew I couldn't let him win this. I had to stop the sale. I had to make him understand that he couldn't manipulate me into giving up everything I'd worked so hard for. The next morning I was up at dawn making phone calls. I started with the realtor, the one who had sent me that email about my house being listed. The first time I'd called I was calm, trying to make sense of what had happened. But when I spoke to the realtor again, my patience was already starting to wear thin. Hello? The realtor answered on the other end of the line. Hi, this is Evelyn Thompson. I received an email from you about my property. My father has apparently listed it for sale. I need to know exactly what's going on. Ah, yes, Mr. Thompson, your father. He told me you were living abroad and had abandoned the house. He said you were no longer interested in it. So we proceeded with listing. It's all in order, the realtor explained, his tone casual. Abandoned? I've been working overseas. The house is mine. I've been paying the mortgage. I've been taking care of it, I said, my voice tight with anger. You need to stop the sale immediately. I understand that you're upset, Miss Thompson, he said. But there was something about his tone that made it clear he was more sympathetic to my father than to me. But the listing's been up for a few weeks now and there's already interest. I really think it's too late to back out at this point. Too late? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. No, it's not too late. It was never your decision to make, and it's not my father's decision either. I am the owner of that house and I never gave him permission to sell it. Well, I can't cancel the listing without Mr. Thompson's approval, he said, his voice a little more defensive now. He's the one who signed all the paperwork. I felt my temper flare. You need to get on the phone with him and tell him to stop this right now. I'm coming over there to make sure this doesn't go any further. The line went silent for a moment. I'll contact him right away, the realtor said, but I didn't feel any comfort in his words. I knew that my father had a way of twisting things, of convincing people to do what he wanted, and I was terrified he might get away with this. I hung up the phone and called my lawyer. This was no longer a family disagreement. It was turning into a legal battle. I needed someone on my side who could take charge of the situation and make sure my rights were protected. Hello, Evelyn, what's going on? My lawyer's voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the underlying concern in it. I need help, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay composed. My father has listed my house for sale behind my back. I need to stop the sale and I need it to happen now. Wait, slow down, my lawyer said, and I could almost picture her leaning forward in her chair, taking notes. What happened? Is the house in your name? Yes, I bought it. I'm paying the mortgage. It's my house. And your father has listed it for sale? Yes, he claimed I abandoned it, and he's trying to sell it to pay off his debts. I've called the realtor and told him to stop, but he said it was too late. I need to know what my options are. I can't let this happen. Well, it sounds like you're going to need to file a legal motion to stop the sale, she said, her voice steady now. I can help you with that, but I'll need to see the paperwork your father signed and any correspondence you've had with the realtor. I'll get that to you, I said, already thinking about the stack of documents I had at home. What are the chances of this going through without me knowing about it? Not good, she replied. It depends on the legal process and whether or not the sale is already in progress, but if it's just the listing that's up, you should still be able to halt it. We need to act fast. I hung up, feeling slightly better, but my mind was still consumed with the thought of my father's betrayal. I knew I couldn't rely on him anymore. He was too far gone, and if he thought for 1 second he could control me by threatening my home, he was about to learn how wrong he was. I didn't waste any time. I made my way over to my father's house, hoping to catch him before he could do anything else. The anger I felt toward him was suffocating, but I knew I had to keep my head. I couldn't let him get away with what he'd done, not after everything he had put me through over the years. When I knocked on the door, I didn't expect him to be surprised to see me. He was always one step ahead, always prepared for whatever I might throw at him. I figured you'd be back, he said as he opened the door, his voice full of mock sympathy. What's the matter? Did the sale of your precious house get to you? You don't get to do this, I said, my voice firm. I told you I'm stopping the sale. He didn't flinch. You can't stop it now, Evelyn. It's already done. The listing's out there. People have seen it. I've been talking to realtors. I'm not going to turn back now. You don't get to decide what happens to my house, I shot back. That house isn't yours to sell. You don't even have the right to make that decision for me. He scoffed, clearly annoyed. I'm your father, Evelyn. I've done so much for you and this is how you repay me? By making me look like a fool in front of everyone? You think you can just leave me high and dry when I need help? I bit back a retort, forcing myself to stay calm. This isn't about you. It's about what's mine. You had no right to put my house up for sale. I'm stopping it and there's nothing you can do to change that. Well, we'll see about that, he said, his tone cold. You've always been stubborn, Evelyn, but this time you're going to regret it. I could feel the tension crackling in the air as we stood there, staring each other down. My heart pounded in my chest, but I wasn't backing down. I couldn't. Not this time. It felt like everything had led to this moment, the confrontation that would change everything. The past few days had been a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings with my lawyer, and gathering evidence. But no matter what I did, it felt like my father was always one step ahead. Every time I thought I had him cornered, he found a way to slip through my fingers. But today that was going to change. Today I was taking control. I had contacted the realtor again, and this time I made it clear that if they didn't halt the sale immediately, I would take legal action. I had filed the paperwork with my lawyer and was prepared to take my father to court if necessary. But there was still one more thing I had to do. I had to face him. I had to show him that I wouldn't let him get away with this. I wouldn't let him destroy what was mine. When I arrived at his house, I could already feel the tension in the air. The door was ajar as if he was expecting me. I knocked firmly, my hand shaking slightly from the intensity of what was about to happen. He answered almost immediately, his face twisting into a forced smile. Back again, huh? What is it now, Evelyn? I thought we'd already gone over this. I'm done talking, I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. This ends today. He stepped aside to let me in, but I didn't move. You think you can just fix this with a few words? It's already too late. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. You don't get to decide what's too late, Dad. This house isn't yours to sell. It's mine. I have the legal documents to prove it. Legal documents? He sneered, his face contorting in disbelief. You're really going to go down that road? You're going to drag this out in court and make it all public? You think anyone's going to take your side? Maybe not everyone, I said, meeting his gaze head-on. But I don't need anyone's approval but my own. This is my home and you're not taking it from me. His laugh was bitter. You think you're so much better than me? You think you can just take everything you want and leave me with nothing? You don't even care about me. You're just like your mother, always running away when things get tough. I felt a sting in my chest. He was hitting below the belt, trying to manipulate me to make me feel guilty. But I had made my peace with my past. I wasn't going to let him use it against me anymore. I've worked hard for everything I have, and I'm not going to let you take it from me, I said, my voice rising with the intensity of my emotions. You had no right to list my house for sale, and you don't get to blame me for your problems anymore. He stepped forward, his face red with fury. You don't understand, Evelyn. I've been drowning in debt. I've tried everything, and this was the only way out. I thought maybe you could help me, but you've just been too busy with your life to notice. All I wanted was some help. You've always asked for help, but you never learned how to help yourself, I snapped, feeling the heat of my words. You're not going to use me to fix your mistakes. This isn't about helping you, it's about you trying to control me, trying to take what's mine, because you're too proud to ask for real help. For a moment he seemed to deflate, the anger fading from his face. He stood there, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. The tension between us was palpable, and I could almost hear the thoughts running through his mind. But then, just as quickly as the softness appeared, his expression hardened again. You think you've won? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. You think you can just walk in here and stop everything? The sale's already in motion. You can't stop it. I'm stopping it, I said firmly. I've contacted the realtor and I've spoken with my lawyer. The sale is going nowhere. You think they'll listen to you? He asked, a sneer creeping back into his voice. What makes you think anyone's going to believe you? You're just a woman, Evelyn. You can't fight this. I felt the anger surge through me again, but this time it wasn't just anger. It was power. I was done being manipulated. I was done being made to feel small. I don't need anyone to believe me, I said, my voice steady and full of resolve. I have the law on my side and I'm not going to let you get away with this. I'm stopping it. His face twisted in disbelief and for a moment I thought he might lash out. But then his shoulders slumped and he turned away, his voice bitter and defeated. You'll regret this, you know. You've ruined everything. I could feel the weight of his words, but they didn't have the same power they used to. I had taken control. I had stood up for myself, and no matter what he said now, I wasn't backing down. Maybe I have, I said, walking toward the door, but I'm not the one who ruined things. You did that all on your own. I could feel his eyes on me as I left the house, but I didn't look back. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I had taken my power back. I had stopped him. I had made sure that my house, my home, was no longer at risk. And as I stepped outside, the weight on my shoulders seemed to lift just a little bit more. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. My father might not have learned his lesson yet, but I was done being his pawn. The game had changed and I was in control now. The days that followed were of legal paperwork, tense conversations, and the realization that my life had fundamentally changed. When I left my father's house that day, I thought the battle was over. But I quickly learned that there were consequences to standing up for myself, consequences I hadn't fully prepared for. The first thing I did was take the matter straight to my lawyer. We filed an emergency motion to prevent the sale of the house, and I was relieved to hear that the realtor had, in fact, been instructed to halt the process. But the fight wasn't over. My father, predictably, wasn't backing down. He tried calling me repeatedly, leaving messages filled with guilt and anger, accusing me of ruining his life. I didn't pick up. I didn't want to hear it. I was done being manipulated by him. He had crossed a line and I had drawn my own boundaries. I wasn't going to let him guilt trip me into submission again. "You don't know what it's like, Evelyn. You don't understand," he'd say in one voicemail. "This is your fault. If you had just been there for me, none of this would have happened." Each message was like a punch to the gut. He wasn't asking for forgiveness or offering any kind of accountability for his actions. He was still trying to make it my problem, to make me feel responsible for his mistakes. But I had learned a long time ago that I couldn't save him. He had to save himself, and I couldn't allow him to drag me down with him. The next few weeks were filled with back-and-forth calls and legal maneuvering. It became clear that my father's debts were deep, and he wasn't going to get out of his financial mess without making some serious changes. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I wasn't going to sacrifice my future for him. I knew he was angry, and I knew he felt betrayed, but for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to protect him from the consequences of his own actions. And that was one of the hardest parts. It wasn't easy to watch him struggle. It wasn't easy to see him, the man who had once been my protector, now reduced to someone who couldn't even manage his own life. But I had to let go. One day, about a month after the confrontation, I got a call from my lawyer. They had reached a settlement with my father's creditors. It wasn't ideal, but it meant he wouldn't lose everything. His debts would be consolidated, and he would have a chance to rebuild his finances, but there was no mistaking it. He had lost this round. The house wasn't going anywhere, and he would have to figure out a way to pay his bills without manipulating me or anyone else. I hadn't spoken to him since the day I stopped the sale, but I knew it was time. The settlement meant that we could start moving forward, and I wanted to be the one to take the first step. When I finally called him, it felt like everything in my body was telling me to just walk away, to cut ties completely. But I couldn't do that. He was still my father, and despite everything, I still cared. "Hello?" His voice was cautious, unsure. "Dad, it's me," I said, my voice softer than I had expected. "I just wanted to let you know that the sale is officially off. I've spoken to the realtor, and the house is mine." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought he might hang up or worse, lash out again, but then he spoke. I don't know what to say, Emma," he said, his voice low. "I guess I just didn't know what else to do. I'm sorry." I was quiet for a moment, trying to figure out what I wanted to say to him. The apology was a start, but it wasn't enough. It couldn't undo everything he had done, but it was a step in the right direction. I had to decide if I could accept it. "I'm not doing this for you, Dad," I said. "I did this because it was the right thing to do, but that doesn't mean you get to treat me like this again. I'm not going to keep letting you take advantage of me." "I know," he replied, his voice sounding defeated. "I know I messed up. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to fix things. I don't want to lose you." "You can't keep trying to control me," I said firmly. "If you want a relationship with me, it has to be on my terms, not yours, and I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's not." "I understand," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll try. I don't know how, but I'll try." We sat in silence for a moment. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were actually communicating. Maybe it was too late for us to ever go back to the way things had been, but there was still hope for something new. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time I felt like we could both start rebuilding. After the call, I took a deep breath and looked around my house, the house that had almost been taken from me, the house that had been the source of so much pain, but also so much strength. I wasn't just fighting for a building. I was fighting for my independence, for my ability to make my own choices without being weighed down by someone else's expectations. The journey wasn't over. I still had a long road ahead of me, filled with difficult conversations and decisions, but in that moment I knew one thing for sure. I had taken control. I had protected what was mine, and I had learned that sometimes standing up for yourself meant letting go of things you thought you needed even when it hurt, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could finally breathe. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal finalizations and personal reflection. My lawyer confirmed that the sale of the house had been officially halted, and the realtor had been instructed to remove the listing. The house was safe, and so was my sense of independence. But the emotional toll of the situation lingered. I found myself replaying the confrontation with my father, the words we'd exchanged, and the years of tension that had led us to that moment. I decided to take some time off work to focus on myself. I spent days cleaning and reorganizing the house, as if physically reclaiming the space would help me emotionally reclaim my life. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and even planted new flowers in the front yard. Each task felt like a small victory, a way of reminding myself that this house was mine, and no one could take that away from me. During this time, I also started therapy. I realized that the issues with my father were just the tip of the iceberg. There were deeper wounds, feelings of inadequacy, the pressure to prove myself, and the fear of failure that I had been carrying for years. Therapy became a safe space to unpack those emotions and start healing. It wasn't easy, but for the first time I felt like I was truly taking care of myself, not just my physical needs but my emotional and mental well-being too. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel more like myself again. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from, people who had always supported me but whom I had pushed aside in my quest for independence. I realized that being independent didn't mean I had to do everything alone. It meant knowing when to ask for help and when to lean on the people who cared about me. My relationship with my father remained strained, but it was different now. We spoke occasionally, mostly about surface-level things, the weather, his health, my work. The conversations were awkward, but they were a start. I could tell he was trying, in his own way, to respect the boundaries I had set. He didn't bring up money or his debts, and for that I was grateful. It wasn't the relationship I had always hoped for, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my house, watching the sun set over the quiet neighborhood, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The house, once a symbol of my struggle, now felt like a sanctuary again. It was more than just a building. It was a testament to my resilience, my ability to stand up for myself, and my determination to create a life on my own terms. I thought about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. I knew there would still be challenges, life was never without them, but I felt ready to face them. I had learned that independence wasn't just about financial stability or living alone. It was about knowing your worth, setting boundaries, and having the courage to protect what matters most to you. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone take my power away again. I would continue to grow, to heal, and to build a life that was truly mine. And if anyone ever tried to cross that line, I would be ready. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I had taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let go. Not now, not ever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on more exciting content like this. Stay tuned for more, and I'll see you in the next one.